Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has confirmed that counteroffensive operations against Russian forces are underway. Zelensky gave little in the way of detail, but his comments followed claims by Russia's President Vladimir Putin that Ukrainian forces were taking significant losses. Both Kyiv and Moscow report intense fighting in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia region.
Ukrainian infantry fighting in the fields near the city of Bakhmut. This is one of several points along the vast front line where Ukraine has launched localized attacks, prompting Russian President Vladimir Putin to declare that Kyiv's much-anticipated counteroffensive has begun.
First of all, we can clearly say that the offensive has begun, as shown by the use of strategic reserves of the Ukrainian army. This is the first thing. Secondly, the Ukrainian troops haven't achieved what they wanted at not even a single area of fighting. This is an absolutely obvious thing.
To press home this message, Russia has released several videos on social media showing knocked out Ukrainian armor. These drone images show a valuable German-made Leopard 2 tank and several US-supplied Bradley infantry fighting vehicles abandoned or destroyed. Here, a Leopard is hit by a kamikaze drone. Western hardware has been crucial in enabling Ukraine to go on the offensive, but it has been supplied in limited amounts. Speaking during a visit by Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in Kyiv, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky cautioned against the Russian narrative, but confirmed that Ukraine had gone on the attack.
It is important that Russia always feels that they don't have much time left for them, in my opinion. Counter-offensive and defensive actions are taking place in Ukraine, at which stage I will not say in detail. I believe that we will definitely feel all this. I would not trust Telegram channels, and especially Putin.
Apart from Bakhmut, Ukrainian attacks have also been reported in Velika Novosilka and Orikhiv in the south. Some reports suggest limited gains. But Ukrainian units like this column of Bradleys are trying to pierce Russian defenses several lines deep. And it is already clear that any success will come at a steep price.
And we can discuss this with former military intelligence officer Frank Ledwidge, who joins us from Oxford. Frank, so good to have you with us. After months of anticipation and speculation, President Zelensky has now offered the strongest confirmation yet that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has indeed begun. Why has he chosen to speak about it now, and what do you make of the way he told the world?
Well, good morning, Monica. Well, we've seen over the last 17 or 18 months that the Ukrainian leadership and the government as a whole is chronically cagey about these things. It's reluctant to talk about its successes even, or its setbacks. But of course, people in Kiev, throughout Ukraine, and such as ourselves, talk about little else than the counteroffensive. And it's very clear from a number of sources, clear to anyone, that it's now underway and has been actually for several days. So in a sense, President Zelensky was simply confirming the obvious, notwithstanding his comments about social media and so forth, which of course is completely abuzz with all this stuff.
Now, based on the early push that we've seen so far from a strategic point of view, what are the Ukrainians' main goals, you think?
Well, let's deal with that in two ways. And it does seem one does try and avoid the armchair generalship, but it does seem that the Ukrainians are doing quite well. So far, they're making progress, as the report said. And they're making progress, of course, in Zaporizhzhia, which is the oblast in the south of Ukraine, the oblast that leads to Crimea. And back in September, General Zelenskyy, who's the commander-in-chief of Ukrainian armed forces, made it very clear and said explicitly that the center of gravity of our operations, and these counteroffensive operations have been foregrounded for months, will be Crimea. So the objective at the operational level is to hold at risk Crimea, or indeed to retake it. But I suspect they'll stop at a point where they're within range to hold at risk Russian bases there. Then, of course, there's a second strategic objective, which is to sustain Western support and sustain the fight. And it's this that's really rattling Russian elites in Moscow. What we're seeing, according to very, very credible commentators, is a very obvious change in the atmosphere in Moscow, because they've realized that none of the objectives of the war have been attained. That's obvious to anybody, and Russian elites are not stupid. But what they're also beginning to fear is some level of Ukrainian success, which they see happening. And that success, cutting off Crimea from Russia, would be terminal to the regime and, of course, cause instability to a very great degree. One other thing, Monica, the theory of victory of Ukraine is a collapse of the Russian army and a consequent collapse of the regime. And after that, Ukraine will take its place in Central and Eastern Europe. That's the fear of the Russian elites. It's very obvious now.
All right, military analyst Frank Ledwidge, as always, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you, Monica.